The Out of Bounds Show podcast is presented by the Premium Cigars at Havana Smoke Shop. Visit their 2 locations, I-55 in Jackson and on the Res, for your premium cigar needs. Only at Havana Smoke Shop.
We welcome in Steve Robertson. The Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports, genespage.com. Steve joins us on the Modelo guest line. Steve, it's easy for me to ask. Well, actually, I think it's a pretty big head scratcher on Will Rogers. I can somewhat understand the Jaden Walley deal. I know you don't make this decision alone. It's a bunch of people at 247 Sports, but how does Will Rogers not end up in the top 5, 10, or 15 worst-case scenario of prospects his senior year after starting for 3 years at a 6A school and having a hell of a career? He was ranked in, what was he ranked, Blake, 17 or 19? 19th in 247 Sports. What do you think happened there, Steve?
Well, I think a lot of it is just underexposure in many respects. And I think, Will's the guy that we knew about, I guess we started hearing about him as a sophomore. But, I saw him the first time as a junior, and I really thought he was good then, but he elevated himself as a senior. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people look at that. He doesn't have, great measurables. He's not that guy off the page. And I think, he was really a guy as a senior that really elevated his game a little bit. And I just think it was just really a matter of, some of the guys that were evaluating back then just either didn't share a positive impression of him or just, didn't know as much about him. But, the rankings are an inexact science, and it's one of those things that, we always look to improve upon. But, Will was a guy, too, that was a really good class that year. And I think a lot of people just, when you get down to the nitty gritty, you say, well, are there really 12 4-stars in Mississippi that year? No, it can't be. So then, there's people out there that just kind of assume, well, Mississippi should have, 4 or 5 4-stars a year and everybody else should be a 3-star. And so sometimes guys like Will that maybe are on the, the backside of the Dandy Dozen are a guy that probably doesn't get rated as high as they should. And maybe that's a motivation for him.
Yeah, well, that's true. So, Will, I know it's early, but what do you think about Will Rogers in his second camp, but first time to go through with a spring under his belt and a real summer?
Well, we didn't get a chance to watch him in practice last year, so it's difficult to compare. But, to watch him, as the guy in practice to these days, and I know Leach told me yesterday when I asked him the question that it's still an open competition. It's not. It may be in his mind, and maybe that's what he's saying, to motivate Will. But it's Will. And, I said all summer and back in the spring that I expected Will, to be the guy, and I certainly expect that to be the case. And, poor Jack Abraham is a guy that just hadn't been able to get out there. He's barely been able to practice, and, he's working back from an injury. And he was out there yesterday. It's not a disciplinary issue at all. He was part of kind of a freak accident earlier this summer, and he still had some lingering issues because of it, but, here we are now, 4 or 5 practices in, and he's barely been involved. And so he's not really a part of the competition at this point. That's not to say that he won't be serviceable and be a good backup for State once he returns to good health. But, it's Will Rogers and then Levertich is the second guy, but really the gap between two is pretty dramatic in my mind now. And that's not to say that Levertich is having a bad camp. There was a stretch yesterday. He had 9 or 10 straight completions. I mean, he gets the ball out quickly. State's in a much better situation quarterback-wise, this year than probably they were last year, because I think you've got some guys that in a pinch could go out there and run the team for you. But it's Will Rogers. He is the starter.
Mm-hmm. Steve Robertson on the Modelo guest line, the Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports. Will Rogers was the 19th rated prospect in the state of Mississippi at quarterback, most important position on the field. And, of course, Jaden Walley was a star last year, too, and I think he was 17th. I'm looking at this list of guys in front of them. They're going to have one hell of a career to I guess, justify their, second, fourth, 8th, 10th ranking. Now, Forbes had a super year, and there were a couple other guys. Okay, with Will Rogers, what would you say eyeball test as far as weight or muscle he's put on, Steve?
I'd say maybe 10 to 15 pounds. I mean, and you can really, tell it, on his shoulders and his traps. This is a guy that's clearly been in the weight room. And you can see really he's a lot more decisive with the football. It's not just from a physicality standpoint where you see some improvement. Just watching him run the scheme, watching him run the show, he's not out there guessing. He's not out there just thinking, okay, what do I do next? I mean, that's the thing that I think has been really impressive to watch in the first few days of camp is that, he looks like a veteran guy. He doesn't look like a guy that's out there kind of figuring it out. He looks like a guy that knows it's his team and he's got to go out there and run this thing, at a high level of proficiency. But, I just think there is a presence about Will that, maybe a lot of other people don't really have.
Yeah.
I think he is a guy that is, he's the alpha, and I think he knows it, and I think that his receivers know it as well.